Well, hello again, bikers. Time for my next video in the owner's review series. Having done the sort of standard good and bad things, I think we now get to what hopefully will be the most interesting bits, which is some of the key modifications that I've made over the last couple of years and what I think of them. So in this series, part of the series, I'm not going to talk about standard bike mods that you do to just about any bike, such as the engine bars, heated grips, panniers, top box, all those sorts of things, screen changes. I'll take those as read and talk about the things that are more specific to the CBX. So probably the logical place to start is rally raid suspension upgrades, as they are the most expensive investment I've made in this bike, and there's a lot of interest in the rally raid products, and rightly so if you ask me. So rally raid suspension upgrades, I did mention I think in my the downsides of the bike that as a cheap A2 bike, like any of the bikes in this sort of category, suspension's a weak point. I'm sure that there's a number of solutions out there, but Rally Raid is one of the companies that's in the UK has invested heavily in this bike and upgrades for it. I've gone that way, and it's the system I know most about, so obviously that's what I'm going to talk about. So where does my experience come from? Well, when I bought this bike new, I ran it stock for a few hundred miles to get a benchmark, and I put in a stage 1 Rally Raid kit on this bike. So that's it's both forks and shock, forks internal and a shock replacement, but it keeps the height of the bike because, as I think I've said, I'm short, and I bought the bike because I needed it to be low and stay low, particularly in the southeast of England environment. So stage 1 was a logical upgrade for me. So I've got the stage 1 in this bike, which has been run in UK conditions for a couple of years now. I've ridden the so-called stage 2 modifications with a hire operator in North America. So I've done several thousand kilometres on stage 2, which is a couple of inches higher, more capable suspension, mostly on the back roads of North America. So a lot of blacktop, but also probably a couple of thousand kilometres of dirt and gravel and some four-wheel drive tracks going up mountains and such like. And so had this bike, had the phase 2 bike. I had on another hire, I had a partially staged 1 bike, and that's quite interesting. I'll talk about that at the end of the video. So I guess there's sort of a couple of questions that come at the fore, right? One is, should I invest in this upgrade of my bike? And then the next one, if you think you should, is do you do the stage 1 or stage 2? So starting at the basic question of do you need to do the upgrade, clearly that's a big factor is the sort of riding you do, and I think in particular the roads you ride on as much as the way you ride. So as I indicated in my faults video, the weakness of the suspension, the stock suspension, is quite a serious lack of damping, so you get the pogo stick effect, which is not great if you're on lumpy and bumpy roads. So here in the southeast, these back roads like this one are pretty up and down and uneven, and that's the primary reason I went for the upgrade in this environment. If you're wanting to do more serious sort of off-road, gravel, four-wheel drive track stuff, then yes, you almost certainly want an upgrade, and the question is just whether it's stage 1 or stage 2. If, however, you live somewhere that's got really good roads and you spend most of the time on the seal, for example, last year I was lucky enough with my wife to spend about a month touring around the South Island of New Zealand in a car, not on a bike. But the roads there, despite it being a country with a small population and a mountainous environment, were generally extremely good. They're really smooth, good seal, and to be honest with you, the stock bike would have been absolutely fine as long as you weren't wanting to go properly onto gravel and four-wheel drive tracks. But if you just kept to the seal in that environment, both city and all throughout the South Island, the stock bike I think would have been absolutely fine. So that's the first question. if you decide that you want the upgrade because you're going to really off-road the bike more, or, you know, four-wheel drive tracks is what I think of as off-road for a bike like this, or you live in an area where the roads are pretty poor, like they are around here, then the next question I think is stage 1 or stage 2. As I've sort of indicated already, the answer for me was quite straightforward, because my height's a limiting factor, and although I was fine riding the higher bike in North America, that's because most of the time you're out in the back roads and really just in town to pick up gas, and tippy toeing it every now and then is no big deal. But if you're in and around town all the time and the roads are uneven and there's potholes and things, it's like I like to have a good grip. So for that reason, for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer to stay with the stage 1 for my own bike. If you're going to do more challenging riding, or if you've got the length in your legs, then stage 2 is probably the way to go. So there is another question. I guess I should say I'm not going to run through exactly what the mods involve in any great detail, because Rally Raid has really good information on its website. So if you're interested in it, you should certainly read their website, and they have a CB500X Adventure website as well, and they have really substantial information there, so that'll give you all the detail you need to know. There is another issue if you go to the stage 2 way, and that is whether to do the 19-inch wheel if you've got one of the pre-2019's 500s. Yeah, I'm not going to dwell on that too much. I think, you know, it's clearly a mod that would work for some people if you really think the CB is the bike for you, because there's not much else out there that does exactly what it does. You might want to do that. I'm in the school of thought that says I think it would be really nice to have, but by the time you look at the cost of doing all those upgrades, it's getting to be quite an expensive bike, and at that point that would sort of undo one of my basic motivations for the 500. It's a fairly reasonably priced bike that doesn't cost you too much, and indeed by the time I'd done all those modifications, I think I would look at other bikes rather than this bike. So we'll just move on from that one. So having done the stage 1 to this bike, what do I think of it? Well, I mean, it's really good, right? It cost about £700, which for a major suspension fix with a completely new shock is I think quite reasonable. It's a complete fix to the under damping of the stock bike. It stabilises the bike very nicely. You can ride in these back roads in a much more spirited fashion if and when you want to, and feel much more secure. So the short answer is, if that's your issue, then it's brilliant. What else can I say about the suspension? I said, well, I've dealt with Rally Raid a number of times. I have other bikes that I've bought their products for too, and my general experience of them is their products are very well engineered. If you do have any issues, their support is good and they are responsive, and their instructions are very good. So in general, if you have even a basic level of mechanical expertise, and I mean if you're happy to have a Haynes manual and service your own CB500X, you'll have no problem installing your own Rally Raid suspension, which is in my view good, because it keeps the cost down, and there's a lot to be said for doing things yourself, because then you know how your bike works, what's in there and how it's put together, and if you need to change anything, you know how to go about doing it without having to pay someone else. Right, just get around this corner here, carefully. There's some nasty on the right here. There we go. So that's good. Right, now I said at the start that I'd ridden a stage 1 and a stage 2 rental bike, and then a partial stage 1. So one of the things that I learnt from that is I upgraded my suspension before I rode the partially done rental bike, and so that bike, the operator had it as a low bike, so they'd kept it at the lower or the standard seat height for the pre-19s, and being in the know, they had just modified the forks and left the shock standard, and I have to say the bike was very good, and that included both on the gravel as well as, you know, on the hard pack. So I was quite impressed with that, and I think what I learned from that is that actually I had, for no good reason, kind of assumed a lot of the instability was from the shock, but actually that appears not to be the case. It appears that most of the instability is possibly from the fork, which admittedly when you take it apart is incredibly basic inside in the stock bike. So what I learned from that is if I was doing it again for these conditions, I would probably just do the fork mod first and then ride it for a while before doing the shock. And for the UK sort of conditions, I suspect that would have been entirely adequate, and that would have saved about 400 quid and pretty much done the job. So that's just one of those things you learn. Are there any downsides to the Rally Raid modifications or to modifying your suspension in general? So I do find that with my modified forks that the plushness on small hits and ripples and sharp edges in the road has been lost. The stock suspension was very good on that, whereas this is a bit harder on that ride, so you get a bit more vibration off the front. So there is a bit of a trade-off there. Again, I'll just take care here. The other thing is one of the best kept secrets in motorcycling. Now, I consider myself reasonably well read, and I certainly did a lot of research before buying this bike and before doing the upgrades, and there's lots of information out there about Rally Raid upgrades of the CB500, not just the suspension but lots of other parts too. And there's lots of information about poor little badger, about bikes modifications full stop. I've read plenty of road biking magazines over the years. What no one really says is that if you're doing modifications, you need to think about the implications for insurance. So just a word of warning is that certainly in the UK, and I'm guessing overseas too, but certainly in the UK, insurers are quite fussy about what modifications you have on your bike, and you need, in my view, you need to declare the modifications honestly. The reason for that is I'm well aware that insurance works by an after the effect system. So they ask you questions, you give them the answers, then they don't need to investigate it unless there's an incident or accident, and if there is, then they'll investigate. And one of the things they'll look at is whether what you told them was true and whether what they thought they were insuring was what they were insuring. So I'm in that school of thought that says be honest with your insurer. I hope never to need them, but if disaster strikes, heaven forbid, and I do need them, it's likely that I will really need them, and so then I need the contract to be secure, and that requires me to have been honest with them. So I do have a policy, and I do that, and it's a bit painful because they are really finicky, but it's just worth mentioning because I don't know, maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen people talk about it, but it is something to be aware of. I think at the end of the day, with my current insurer in the UK, Bennett's, they're quite good now because they just have a general declaration for suspension work under £1,000 category, and I reckon it's probably cost about that, along with some of the other modifications of the bike, it probably cost me about 50 quid a year, which irritates me a bit because I consider that in general these modifications make the bike safer, but I accept that insurance is a tricky game for them, and so I just take that on the chin, and I've learnt from that. So my takeaway from that is, if you're going to do these modifications, do think about insurance and be honest with your insurer. It would be my advice. And certainly one of the points I've taken out of it is that if I buy another bike, I'll consider, when I buy it, how complete the package is. So you might say, in order to ideally have a bike that has all the core things that I need in terms of suspension and so on, as part of the stock bike, which then sort of avoids all those sorts of issues. I don't want to overstate the problem, but I just thought I'd mention it because in my experience it's not something that's made obvious, and it's something you need to be honest about, especially if you're going to do something which is really obvious, like putting in an accessory shock that any assessor will pick up quite quickly. Anywho, so I think that is about it for Rally Raid suspension. So ciao for now.